We are in the first chapter of first chapter of Mark still, and we're almost done with the first chapter. What the first chapter does is it hustles us through a typical day in the life of Jesus. And in this, again, I want to remind you, how many chapters is Mark's Gospel? 13, okay. And the 14th and the 15th chapter are the Passions. So we have a short account compared to Matthew, 28 chapters. You know, we have a short account, 13 chapters. And so the way Mark presents his story of Jesus is that it happens very quickly. Things move, and there's a lot of action and a lot of signs. So I wanted to remind you of this Greek phrase again, kaiouthos. Can you see it? Okay. Kaiouthos means and immediately, and suddenly, and so on and so forth. The point is that this is a rapid transition into something that's happening. And so he uses it 5 or 6 times just in the first chapter to move it along rapidly and to move it along powerfully. So again, in this passage, we have 3 times that the word kaiouthos is used. And so it reminds us that we're moving quickly through this first chapter, this first episode in Galilee. So, I want to remind you where we're at. So, the Sea of Galilee is here, and Nazareth is here. Jerusalem is down here, and Capernaum is on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. So it is still there, so you can go and see it. Who's seen it? Have you seen it? No? You've seen it? Okay, we've seen it. There's a synagogue there. Those of you who have been there, you know that synagogue dates from the 3rd, 4th, or 5th centuries BC, AD, and that there's an older synagogue that is built underneath that this one was built on. So it's a great place to visit, and I hope you have a chance to at some point. Okay, let's read through the passage. And they went to Capernaum, and immediately, on the Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and he taught. And they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had authority, and not as the scribes. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come here to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed, so that they questioned among themselves, "What is this? A new teaching. With authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. Yes.
In this, there's no immediatelys or at onces or anything. There's only, at the beginning, there's a then they came to confirm. There's
Okay.
none of those.
Yeah. How about in the Bible?
Mine is the same.
Then.
Do you get the sense of immediate movement, or even if it doesn't say that, does it imply that?
No.
Yeah, mine does. My Bible.
Let me see your Bible.
Then.
Well, don't buy anything
Definitely from you. Right here.
Then is the
I only have one
then
then.
they came to compare on the same that astonishes to see. What have you used? Nothing. All right. So these editors have chosen to remove that for some reason, or to soften it so that it doesn't quite stick out. But I want to promote it, and I want to talk about the fact that Mark has a definite agenda here, and that agenda is to move Jesus quickly through this day. So, anything else you notice about this passage?
Authority.
Okay.
It speaks with authority and they recognize it.
Yeah, that's a good word. Let's talk about it. What is this word in Greek? You have no idea. Exousia is the word for authority. Actually, exousia means power. So, in the way this is translated, you could take it back to its roots and say he expresses a power in the way he is speaking. So that's exousia, and they translate that into authority. But do you get the sense that authority is power? That authority is strength? Yeah? So that he comes across as, first of all, a person of internal strength and one who wants to kind of be in charge. All right, what else do you notice?
The rest of that sentence, and not as the scribes.
Okay.
Are they saying that his authority isn't like the authority of the scribes, or are they saying the scribes don't seem to have authority?
His authority is different than the scribes, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So, anything else? All right, let me ask you a question. What do you think about unclean spirits? Do they exist?
Yes.
Do they? I'm not asking you to answer me back. I'm going to hit you with some questions, and I want you to talk about it at your table. Do we have, clearly in the ancient world where things had little scientific explanation, there was a great deal of dependence upon the idea of spirits, evil spirits, good spirits, things that operate outside the sense experience of human beings. Do we have the same kind of thought today, or do we understand things differently? So, take a minute and talk about that at your table.
I guess I'll sit here so I was in the car. Be better, huh? How are you all doing?
I believe it.
I think I'll sit there for now. Next time. I'll sit there for now.
It doesn't have any.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Just being bad, just being
It's just their
You need one? If you need one, I'll call one.
Exorcist hotline.
Is he on email?
Okay, let's join the conversation together. Let's bring it all together. Who's got a thought on this? Yeah, go ahead.
I think we still have exorcisms here, and we still have people that need to be cleaned of unclean spirit. But a lot of the old time ones were mental health problems, I think. So we have the differentiation between unclean spirits and just mental health in today's
Okay.
society where they didn't have it back then.
Okay. All right. And what about this one?
I
Mental
think it
health
was an
or-
unclean spirit.
Okay. All right. Thoughts. Share your thoughts. Be generous.
I think it depends on how you define an unclean or an evil spirit. Because we were saying, is that a feeling that you get if you're in an evil place? Or is that something that's inside of someone that makes them do, makes them do bad things? I don't know.
Well, you tell me. What do you think? What is real to you? Do evil spirits possess people?
Yes.
Yes.
You're saying yeah. Everyone's saying yes. Anyone have a question? Maybe not. No. Okay. You think they can?
It was suggested here that it's more likely that people who are vulnerable, maybe not of a strong constitution, are more open to this sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay, so there could be certain persons who are vulnerable enough to take on the character or the sense of this entity. Is it an entity? It is an entity. It is a being.
Well, it would be an entity because in one point in the Bible he commands it to go into the pigs, right?
Yeah.
Go over the cliff. So there's a thing that's moving. And for me here, I don't know how you would explain I'm convulsing and doing all this stuff and then all of a sudden I'm okay. You know, that's why it leads me to believe it's moving.
Okay,
That
all right.
makes sense.
It seems to be a genuine exorcism. That is, something is exorcised, left, put out.
I think there probably is something that we cannot explain. However, I believe that the devil made me do it as an excuse. And I believe that inside of ourselves, that's where the evil spirit lies when we do those things, whatever it is that's bad.
Okay. So you believe there is actually an entity within us that causes us to do bad things.
I think it's us, not something foreign inside of it. I think it's human nature's desire to do something that is not good, and blame it on something else.
Okay. All right. So you don't believe in an entity outside of ourselves
I'm
that.
not sure. I cannot
Okay.
totally explain a few circumstances.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
My friend from Navajo culture calls them hitchhikers. And as he's moving around on the reservation, there are some places where maybe there's been ceremonies in the past, evil ceremonies in the past, or and he said he had visited some of those places unintentionally and came out and there was something that he was aware of and called it a
Something on his shoulder?
yeah, the devil in him. Something that was affecting his ability to think and act as he did before he picked up the hitchhiker. And went to another ceremony and it was able to be removed from him through a ceremony.
Oh, really? And you don't think this might be psychosomatic, or he might just be a nutcase?
I think that he is more closely in touch with the natural world.
Uh-huh.
Because he's lived outside most of his life.
Yeah.
And I think that he is more aware of, he has extra sensory that most of us don't have. Some of us are just more aware of things. Some of us see better than others. I think he's extraordinary.
Okay. What's important in all this is that Jesus believed in them. And that Jesus understood that they existed, and Jesus and people in Jesus' day also believed that they existed, and therefore were allowed themselves to be subject to them. And so Jesus has to interfere with these powers in order to show that he is stronger. And that's ultimately what we're getting at in this first chapter. Is the contest is not between being nice and not nice. I mean, that's not what the Christian faith or the Gospel of Mark wants to emphasize. It wants to emphasize that Jesus came to battle and to struggle against and to conquer evil. And whatever that form is, as Satan or as temptation or as sin or whatever that form is, and however that form, the bottom line is that Jesus is here to liberate us from those evil sources and evil impulses. Okay? So we're getting a sense in this first chapter, because it'll go on next to the healing of Simon Peter's mother-in-law, who is also, I mean, in the context of the story, the way Mark writes it, he writes it as another exorcism. That the sickness of the woman, the sickness of the mother-in-law of Peter, is actually a demon who has infected her. And so we're seeing this set up. There's going to be this conflict between Satan and the Lord throughout the gospel until Jesus finally overcomes in his death, resurrection, the powers of evil. Which, yeah.
So in the healing at Simon's house, it says that he doesn't let the demons speak.
Mm-hmm.
Is that simply because he's not started his? I mean, he started his ministry.
No, it's called the Messianic Secret. We've talked about this before, but to remind you that the Messianic Secret is a device, a rhetorical device that Mark uses in his gospel. Matthew picks up. Luke has a few incidences of it. But the idea is that you cannot proclaim Jesus as, in terms of who he is, until you understand what the scope of his ministry is. So anything prior to his death, resurrection, and that whole conquest of death, anything prior to that is not going to be a full explanation or full exposition of what his messiahship is about. And therefore, shut up until those days that we can, kind of give you the fullness of the picture, okay? Otherwise, people are going to have a distorted understanding of who the Messiah is and what he's going to do. And if they say he's the Holy One of God, well, why not fix our society? Why not send out the Romans? Why not bring in, this or that and make our world better? But to avoid that, keep quiet. All right? All right, let's look at this a little bit more closely.
Is that something?
When did you get here?
Is that not something that, has that been discussed a lot in the sense of a concept that I'm not familiar with?
The Messianic Secret? Yeah, that's pretty solidly confirmed in Mark's Gospel.
I don't know, I can't say that I've heard of it before in the sense of discussion or.
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
Doesn't say much. But
I'm not sure you're paying attention all the time.
We've discussed the idea many times in
Yeah.
Bible study, but I haven't heard you actually call it the Messianic Secret.
Well, because that's jargon.
Yeah.
But if we talk about it in terms of Jesus knew that his identity would be misinterpreted by the titles that people use. Let's help you, as my disciples, understand who I am from the inside, not from some title or some kind of predetermined idea of what I am. Let's have you learn from the inside. And from the inside, you learn that suffering is the way to glory. And you don't hear that outside. Yeah.
I'm still struggling with unclean spirits. Does that imply that before God created the world, he had these unclean spirits hanging around waiting for people? And then all of a sudden humans came to be and we got infected with unclean spirits? Or is it more likely that it's just separation from God and it causes us to be viewed as having unclean spirits?
Well, you know what? Let's put it this way. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says or reminds us that, or teaches us that God created spirits. That these spirits are free will, have free will, and that these spirits also can choose to follow God or not. Those that chose to follow God considered angels, but angel simply means messenger, okay? But we've got spiritual beings, let's put it that way, spiritual beings, that is a better way to think about it. Spiritual beings that have the potential to choose not God. And in choosing not God, they are choosing evil, or to be deprived of the good. And therefore, if these entities exist, they also have the power to influence us. And so, this is what the Catholic Church teaches. Now, are they demons? Are they little devils? Are they little, things with pitchforks? And whatever. It's not these things have been depicted colorfully over the centuries. But if we go back to the idea God created everything visible and invisible, then there's possibly, or most likely, as we understand in our tradition, there are entities that exist that are spiritual entities that have power in and with us, just as another human being might have power to convince us of something right or wrong. So these spirits have that same capacity, and some have chosen to live their lives apart from God, and some have chosen to live their lives for God, and yet somehow they affect us. How does that sound?
And when you're talking about spiritual beings, because there's the angelic ones that follow God and then the evil ones, it talks about, like a demon can possess someone like that guy who had the evil spirit, and he could break the chains, the guy in the graveyard, that guy. So can angelic ones possess us?
They wouldn't, because that's offensive to our freedom as individuals. So they would not possess us. One more question back. Okay.
They would visit us. They would visit us and guide us, correct?
Angels.
Well, that's the story. Yeah. Donna? You forgot it? Oh.
I know it was. Are spirits like humans that they could repent and?
Well, the story of the church is that their eternity, they are eternal beings. They are not mortal. So their turning from God is an eternal damnation. Now again, this is like we're trying to conjecture about things that we know nothing about. And if you think that, it could be described in this sort of literal, concrete, descriptive way, I'd say you're probably about 90% wrong. I think that, to understand the idea that God created everything, that there are things visible and invisible, and those things have intercourse and interrelationship with us. And sometimes though that relationship with us is malevolent, and sometimes that relationship with us is good and leading us to holiness and life. Okay? So that might be a little easier to understand than little beings of light or darkness. Anyway. Yes?
So if a person is evil, like yesterday was the TV program and this person said, I would like to kill the person, I want to see what it feels like. That has nothing to do with an evil spirit. That's just
Well, it might have something to do with an evil spirit. It might have something to do with temptation. It might have something to do with sin. I mean, yeah. I don't know. I can't dissect the other world. Okay?
Well, there are just some evil people, but they are possessed in some way.
Possession is very exceptional. Evil is not. Okay? So just keep that in mind. If somebody has totally given themselves over to evil spirit, that's very rare. Okay? But it might exist. Okay, are we done with this now? No, it's good. It's good to talk about this because I think sometimes as Catholics, we presume too much. We presume too literal an interpretation of things rather than allow these ideas or these concepts to float in our heads and kind of consider what that might mean for us. I mean, the bottom line of the church is that you never forsake your freedom or your individual responsibility. It's not like anything can take over you without your permission.
Well, what do you think about the scriptures in Ephesians that talk about the war between...
Oh, Lord, Ephesians is the strangest document in the world. But, here's the thing.
Between us and the evil spirits.
Yep. But even St. Paul doesn't differentiate between the spirits. He just says that we are under the influence of these spirits. Some are evil, some are good. Which is what the church teaches, So it's not that they would name them principalities and thrones and dominions and whatever, that we name them. This is a little cartoonish, but it's a way in which we're trying to grapple with the mystery of evil and the mystery of how we are infected by it and how it does take over our lives sometimes. Alrighty, back to the source. All right. First of all, the first sentence of back at 21, if you were to understand the Greek context, it's not an episode, but rather a description of ongoing behavior on the part of Jesus. So it should read something like, and Jesus, as he was accustomed to doing, went into the synagogues and taught. So it's not specifically, this event, but rather a general statement about how he approached his ministry. Here's his ministry. The first thing you do is you go into the Jewish context and you offer your thoughts. Okay? And as a bar mitzvahed Jew, he was permitted to teach. So somebody who is a son of the law, bar mitzvah, son of the law, has achieved the status by which they can offer a lesson or a teaching. So his normal procedure was then to go into the synagogues and to teach. All right, when you teach in the synagogue, it's usually around a lesson, a scriptural quote of some sort. So you can see this more directly applied in Luke's gospel, Luke chapter 4, where the selection from Deutero-Isaiah is chosen, and he preaches on that. And so you have a more classical description of Jesus' role in this setting in Luke, okay? But here he enters the synagogue as he does, and he teaches, and one should understand this as a continual action. And they were astonished. Now, this word, astonished, and we'll see it again. Well, we won't see the same Greek word, but a similar concept with the amazed. So, astonished and amazed. These two descriptions are meant to help us understand that these people saw something of God in this man. Okay? So it's not like, wow, he's pretty good, but it's like, oh my God, he's speaking the truth. Where did he get this from? God has to be speaking to. So amazement and astonishment have to do with marveling. This is marvelous. This is otherworldly. This is unreal that he has this kind of authority. All right. So they were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one who had exousia, power, authority. Now, what they mean by this is that Jesus, when he teaches from himself. That he teaches from examples in daily life. He preaches from the examples of his own wisdom tradition. He does not seem, as we look at all the Gospels, he does not seem to quote the rabbis that have come before him, which is the typical way that the scribes taught. Authentic teaching was essentially a matter of representing what the tradition has offered and bringing it into this assembly today. Okay, I'm not going to teach you anything new. I'm going to tell you what Rabbi so-and-so said, who is repeating what Rabbi so-and-so said, who is actually a student of Rabbi so-and-so. And so, therefore, this has weight. This has authority. This has truth to it because I have this tradition behind me to back it. But Jesus comes along and he says, but I say to you, you have heard it said, you shall not covet, or whatever. But what I say to you, Gospel of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount. We get a good example of his individual authority. He is not basing it on what other rabbis have taught. He is basing it on his own reflection on God's teaching, God's law. Okay? So that's the authority that Jesus has, and they're marveling that he teaches from his own authority and not like their scribes do. Okay? All right. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. Now again, I told you earlier that this is Mark's setup. He wants you to understand that Jesus is not dealing with wishy-washy sinners. Jesus is dealing with Satan. And this conflict between the good, ultimate good, and ultimate evil is the underlying dynamic of the whole gospel, which will lead to his death. Okay? And in that death, it looks as if Satan has won. But then, what happens? Satan is lost. We find out 3 days later. Okay? So that's the conflict that underlies this. It begins right here in the first chapter. We're in a battle, buddy, you and me, and you're going to get trounced. Okay? Okay? So, that's the setting. The unclean spirit comes forth, calls him Jesus of Nazareth. Do you see any significance in that? Excuse me. Any significance in calling him Jesus of Nazareth? I know who you are. Come on, make a guess.
It was traditional to call people, Fred from Phoenicia or
Fred.
Jesus of Nazareth.
Charlotte from Capernaum.
Exactly.
It was, but what was important about this is the demons saying it. And the idea was that if I knew who you are, if I know who you are, if I know that where you're from and I know your people and I know something about you, I have power over you. And so this is an attempt on Satan's part to manipulate the circumstance. I know you. I know what you're all about. I can predict what you're going to do. So it's this sense that I have power over you if I can name you, which is why God in the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, was reluctant to give his name. Okay? He gave it to Moses, and then when he gave it to Moses, it's cryptic. It's not really a name, it's a description. But that's what they got. And so to have a name was power. And so to claim a name in public like that is to claim, I have some authority over you. Okay? So that's what Satan is attempting. Of course, he has no authority over him. Have you come to destroy us? Actually, what this says is, what do you have to do with me? Me and you. What do we have to do with each other? That's what he's saying, you know. What do you, I have my authority, you go your own way. And Jesus is showing, no, the authority of Satan over the world is coming to an end. Okay? So, have you come to destroy us? Has he? Has he come to destroy them? Yes. Yes, he has. Okay? Not in some sense of ultimate, disappearance, but in the sense that ultimate vanquishment is necessary. And God has to put all things under his feet, and Jesus is his agent. I know who you are, the Holy One of God. This is the same technique as to say, Jesus of Nazareth, I know who you are, and to say, I know that you're the Holy One of God. This is amazing, which helps us to understand that there are powers at work here that are not earthly. Okay? Somebody, or this man or this demon, knows who Jesus really is. And Jesus says immediately when he says this, I know who you are, the Holy One of God, Jesus says, shut up. Okay? He says, literally he says, be muzzled. Be muzzled. Keep your mouth shut. Now, why does he do that? Same as the Messianic secret. Keep your mouth shut because you don't know what I'm really about. You don't know what God's Holy One is truly going to do here. And since you have no concept of what I'm about, keep your mouth shut. All right? You have no authority to broadcast something that people aren't going to understand. The word Holy One is something those words were reserved for God alone. And so when any Hebrew would understand that, you don't call somebody a Holy One because holiness is God's alone. And so to call somebody the Holy One of God is to infer that they are divine. All right. Wow. That's a lot to take in, and it's usually going to get misconstrued. So let's not bother with that. Let's avoid that. Let people come to gradually understand what God is, who God is, and what God desires. And so keep quiet. You're only going to disturb things. You're only going to, So, and the response is, of course, that the demon can't reside in this man because Jesus has taken command. Now we're going to see later on in the gospel, we're going to see this parable about the strong man. When a strong man guards his house, who can get in? Unless someone stronger comes along. And Jesus is proving himself. Satan is the strong man. Jesus is proving himself to be the stronger man. Okay? Where are we? Oh, it's time for a break. Let's take a break. We'll come back to this.
Is this the reason why, in Revelation, I think it says something, that there's a name that's never been said, anyone?
There is a name that we have that only God knows. Is that what you're referring to?
Something where, isn't a name for God revealed that's never been defamed or used as a swear word or something?
If it says that in there, I don't know. I couldn't quote you the quote.
It's out there, and I just thought, when you explained this, it kind of made sense that that's why I was like, why would that be? Maybe it's because it could never be defiled.
Yeah, and the idea that God can never be fully known.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so God can never be fully known, so here's a name for God, or a description of God, that will never be uttered.
In this passage, and that passage with the guy who brings things, was that person who's saying this or doing these things, are they possessed by the demon possession? Is they're called out of them, is called out of them, and you no longer have those powers. Like this guy had the revelatory power to know that was Jesus, and the other guy had the
So the idea is that in this spiritual world, there is greater understanding, greater knowledge, okay?
Right, the
which
spiritual.
we don't have. And so therefore the spirits have some knowledge that we don't have, and if by exposing that knowledge they reveal what God is doing, then it compromises what God is trying to do.
He didn't learn that without me.
Yeah.
So like casting out, I mean, there really isn't any mention that he casts around, just kind of.
The implication is the convulsion, like led to the self-empty.
And this is why the Catholic Church has the right of exorcism and exorcists.
Yeah.
Because of these things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the church does, I mean, you were kind of saying that.
Yeah.
It's the church.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Thanks.
Father, you know what I noticed about you, you do your homework. Almost all of them you start off with, and every day you get like dogs and some good.
Yeah. I have to connect with people's experience.
I think that's so nice, you just tie it right in with everyday life, and I think that's so nice.
I have to.
You have to.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Did you bring me a grape? Oh, you brought me a grape. I'll get you another one.
No bad sense, no.
So, Father, I have a quick question for you. So, if the person that I'm sponsoring coming to the Catholic Church that I had dinner with the other night asks me, How does Father Kevin know that the story of Jonah isn't real? What's the answer to that question?
Because there are
I've read the whole catechism, so.
there are too many details in it that suggest this is just a fun story. It's
Like getting eaten by the fish.
yeah,
Okay.
or even the fact that he's going to Nineveh. I mean, it's a ridiculous concept.
So
That'd
knowing
be like
the history
going to
behind.
Moscow. That'd be like me going to Moscow and preaching the gospel.
Oh, okay.
You know?
Okay, see, I don't know the history of the church well enough to know that,
Yeah.
to recognize that, but that's a good point. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, because she's
So
a challenge.
yeah, it's real. It's really it's a broad kind of application of themes rather than a specific. Like the end of the story, a gourd tree grew up in one day. Whether the next day, I mean, gourd trees don't grow up in a day. They might. Grow
Right, but
up
God can make anything happen.
Yeah, but that's silly.
Right. I'll say that to her. Ah,
Okay,
that's silly.
that's silly.
Thank you.
Back to work. Time's up. Did anything change when I said time's up? Nothing. Absolutely nothing changed. Time's up. Time's up. Oh, Lord. Okay. And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him, and they were all amazed. Do you have that word? Amazed? Okay. That amazed is, again, this idea of something wondrous of God has happened here. Not just something wondrous, but something wondrous of God. So they questioned among themselves, what is this? A new teaching, which is a new teaching. With authority, he commands even the unclean spirits. What the author wants to do is to show you some congruity between Jesus' teaching and exorcism. That these are not like separately distinct things, but rather that in his teaching, he has the authority to overcome the powers of evil. So, though not explicitly about exorcism, the idea is that Jesus' teaching is powerful. Jesus' teaching has a way to lift people out of their possession, whatever that looks like, and into a new experience of God. So that's the importance of this authority, this exousia, this power. It has the power to transform lives. And this demon that is cast out, this unclean spirit, is only a visual example of the power of Jesus' word to help people live the life that they are intended to live. Okay? So it's the power of Jesus' word that is being portrayed here, and not just his exorcist power. Does that make sense? That's why he teaches with such authority, power, exousia, rather than just good teaching. All right, and verse 28. And at once, there's Caiaphas again, and at once his fame spread everywhere throughout all the surrounding region of Galilee. Do you have that? Is it different? Do you have it differently? Pretty much the same? Okay, the important thing is not his fame in the sense that, oh, here's a guy who can do amazing things. It's his good reputation that precedes him. He is being publicly praised throughout Galilee. That's what is wanting, it needs to convey. Okay, he's being publicly praised and recognized throughout Galilee. Now, one of the things that Mark does is he contrasts Galilee with Jerusalem, like we talked about last week. Jerusalem is a place of conflict where the powers of evil will coalesce in the authorities of Judaism who will put him to death. And Galilee is the place where he has good experiences, he gathers great crowds, he's able to perform signs, he's able to, convince his audience of his authority. Okay? The difference between Galilee and Jerusalem. All right, any questions on this passage? Yeah.
What are you gonna preach on?
Don't ask me that.
But isn't it also the case that at the end he says Galilee rejected him too, like Capernaum, and that miracles had been performed there, and it still didn't do what needed to happen?
That's in the Gospel of Luke, which is a little different in terms of his emphasis. But Mark's Gospel wants to give you the idea that Galilee is a good place. So we've got different traditions. All right, let's take a look at Deuteronomy. And I want to remind you of some things about Deuteronomy. Okay, Deuteronomy, even though it's the fifth book of the Bible, the Hebrews call it Devarim or Devarim. Do you know what that means? Okay? This, we're going to just put this down because this is really the way Hebrew is written. Debar, whatever, means word. And when you add an E, I am on the end, it means plural, words. So in this we get a sense that the book of Deuteronomy is a book of God's words. And more specifically, it's Moses' words. So what you have in the book of Deuteronomy is 3 speeches by Moses given to the people on the brink of entering into the promised land, right? Say yes. Yes, right. Okay. These 3 sermons are most likely composed during the time of Josiah's reform. And Josiah was a great reformer in the land of Judah of the religion, bringing it back to its purity. He was the king, and he wanted to help Israel reform, reshape its religion around the commands of God and around the books, sacred books. So he brought a reform, and part of that reform was the appearance of this book, the Devarim. And the appearance of this book, it probably was edited over a period of time, but here's God's words to Israel to help them live the life that they are meant to live as they enter the promised land. So this should reshape our understanding of who we are and how we are to live. So this book has these lessons of the structure of how was the law received and given to us, and then how do we live it, and then what do we bring forward. Okay? So we are in chapter 18?
Yes.
15 to 20.
Okay. All right. I can't see anymore. A prophet like me will the Lord your God raise up for you among your own kindred. Now, Moses is speaking. So this is a speech of Moses. But when this is written, Moses is long dead. Okay? So the character of this is like a fictional speech that Moses is giving. All right? An address that Moses is giving. All right. Prophet like me, the Lord your God will raise up from among you, your own kindred. This is exactly what you requested of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly when you said, "Let me not again hear the voice of the Lord my God, nor see the great fire anymore, or I will die." And the Lord said to me, "What they have said is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their kindred, and will put my words into the mouth of the prophet. The prophet shall tell them all that I command." All right, do you remember in the book of Exodus, chapter 19, the people gather at the foot of Mount Sinai, right? They have come out of Egypt. They've gone through the desert. They've come to Mount Sinai. They're camping at the foot of the mountain. And the Lord appears to be talking to Moses from the mountain, and it's thunder and lightning and flashing fire and all this kind of stuff. And the people are scared to death. So that's what Moses is referring to here. Remember that time when we were at Horeb, Sinai, same mountain. We were there, and you asked that God not speak to us directly again. It's too scary. We better have a human being that is spoken to so that they can share God's words with us so it isn't so scary. All right? So that's what they're asking for. Okay. What they have said is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among your kindred, and will put my words into the mouth of the prophet. The prophet shall tell them all I command. Anyone who will not listen to my words, which the prophet speaks in my name, I myself will hold accountable for it. But if a prophet presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded, or speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. All right, what is essentially being done here is God is instituting the office of prophet. All right? Now, prophets have already existed, but here God is bringing the people in mind back to Sinai so that they understand this command or this concept of prophecy began way back then. And I'm reaffirming it now. The idea that a prophet, what's the essential role of the prophet? Not to preach or not to speak about the future. His role is to speak God's word. That's the role of a prophet. And that's really important to understand. Because we often think of prophecy as foretelling the future. And though it may contain statements about the future and God's plan and so on and so forth, the prophet's real role is to call the people to attention to God's words. What is God saying to us as his people? This passage is also suggesting that there'll be more than one prophet. Even though he says, a prophet like me, the Lord your God will raise up. But it goes on to talk about prophets in general and non-prophets. And non-prophets are those who speak a false word, whereas true prophets speak the true word of God. So we're learning that the institution of the role of the prophet in Israel has become now an essential established role in the community. So, then we have a history of prophets, okay? And Jesus is seen as the eschatological prophet. What does that mean? He is the last and the greatest of all the prophets, in the sense that he's not just a guy who tells you the future. He's a guy who speaks for God. That's the role of the prophet, to speak a word on the behalf of God. So the word of God is the Dabar Yahweh. Dabar Yahweh, and the prophet is responsible for preaching the Dabar Yahweh. Okay? Questions? Okay, we're looking at something was written around the 700s BC. Moses was around 1200 BC. So we're looking at quite a range of years between the time of Moses and the time that this is written. But this is written as pseudographic, you know. Moses said, Moses wrote, Moses, so on and so forth. Pseudographic. You know that word? P-S-E-U-D. P-S, pseudo. Pseudo. It's a pseudo. It's a false, you know, thing. Let's look at Corinthians. That time? Yeah. It's still snowing out there. Yeah. I don't want to go to Ignacio. It's snowing. Can anyone excuse me? Chapter 7. (32 through 35). All right. Now look at the context so that we understand this a little bit better. First of all, he's approving of celibacy. But why? I mean, that's the important of this whole. He wants to help the Christian live a life dedicated to the Lord because the Lord is coming soon. And so with this kind of urgency, don't bother getting married, okay? Don't bother having kids. Don't bother doing this. Just, get ready because the Lord is coming. So he has this very immediate sense of Christ's return, that he is going to experience it as a living being. Only later in his writing will he reflect on the fact that he'll probably die before the Lord returns. But at this point, he's convinced that the Lord's return is in a matter of months or weeks or, something like that. So, with that in mind, he can write this advice. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about affairs of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man has social obligations, is anxious about worldly affairs, particularly, it doesn't say that, how to please his wife. What'd you say?
We wish.
Okay. How to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried woman or girl, you have girl? Virgin, yeah. It's actually technically virgin. The unmarried woman or virgin is anxious about the affairs of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly affairs, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided attention in the Lord. So one of the things that we've got to draw a distinction of about Paul's writings is he's not talking about body and spirit. You know, like you people who are attending to the natural world are all concerned with the body, and we're concerned with the spirit. That's a later reflection on Catholic scriptural theology. Paul has this sense of body-spirit unity, that this is not a duality, this is a being, a single being, who is composed of body and soul, and they don't get separated, okay? And so he wants his audience, his Corinthians, to be prepared for the Lord's coming as their primary objective. And so he's kind of convincing them, put your focus on being pleasing to the Lord. And you could do the other thing. I mean, if you're called to that, if you're called to marriage, if you're called to that, you could do that, but acknowledge the fact that it's going to be harder for you to pay attention to God, because you're going to have legitimate obligations, legitimate social obligations to your family, to your wife, to your career, whatever, that will actually steal some of your time and your attention to what God wants of you, or what God would like from you, not necessarily what he wants from you. So he's offering counsel, particularly to those who have not made a decision about how their life will play out, or a spouse, or whatever. And so he offers to promote, he says to promote good order. Good, and our lives should be ordered first to God. That's good order. Right? What?
I don't agree with him. I think when you get married, things happen in your life that you go to God more than you ever did when you were single. That's what I think.
I'm single. I've gone to God far more times than you have. Okay, let's meet next week.